I met my friend Chuck about 1.5 years ago. We were both part of an online local group for single parents and eventually met offline with other group parents. I have known Britt since high school. Chuck's wife died of childbirth complications the day their daughter was born, more than 2 years ago. Britt is a few months out of a 9-year relationship. Both of them have expressed wanting to meet other people. And I thought they'd be good for each other because of common interests, and we all have kids of similar ages. 2 days before Christmas, Chuck and Britt went out on their first date. I kept Chuck's daughter at my house so the two could have some more time together without him having to worry about the baby. The plan was for her to spend the night. She's done it before and gets along great with my 3-year-old girl. But Chuck knocked on my door at 11 p.m. to get his daughter. He barely said a word to me and I could tell he had been crying, but he wouldn't tell me what was wrong. The next day, I asked Britt what happened. She said that they had dinner and a couple drinks. Things were going excellent. She said she felt like they had great chemistry and were even getting physical at his house. But he suddenly told her to stop and to leave immediately. She swears that she has no idea what she did wrong and is really hurt by the whole thing. I believe her because she is really sweet and social. I've never seen her do anything to piss anyone off. I tried to talk to Chuck at the same time to get his side of the story and see what went wrong. All he said that he wasn't feeling it and didn't want to discuss it further. I didn't push it, but when I went to wish him a Merry Christmas a day later, I saw he had deleted me from his social media. I texted it to him instead and asked, "You okay?" But no response. I am seriously hurt and don't know what to do. Chuck has become one of my closest friends, and our daughters are the best of friends too. I am really worried that this has something to do with his wife. And I want to apologize if he felt like I was pressuring him to date after her death. At the same time, I don't want to overstep boundaries and bother him when he's having a hard time. It's been over a week and I'm worried / upset. I recently won an all-expense-paid trip to Disney World for 4 nights, for myself and 3 guests. I am currently planning on bringing my boyfriend, my mother, and my boyfriend's mother. I know we all aren't exactly Disney's key demographic, but it honestly means a lot to our mothers that I am inviting them. Both my boyfriend and I grew up in poorer families that could never afford expensive vacations. And this is the first trip to Disney World for all of us. I know this is probably the only opportunity our mothers will ever have to go to Disney. And for now they are both in good enough health to still enjoy the rides. The problem is with my cousin, Jane, who has been hounding me to take her 5-year-old daughter, Kelly, instead of my boyfriend's mother. I know, what kind of monster am I for not wanting to bring a little girl to the place where dreams come true? Except Jane's family has already been to Disney World twice, most recently earlier this year in February. My cousin has done very well for herself. She runs a successful photography business, and her husband is an engineer. They are definitely able to afford their own vacations. If Jane wasn't so well off, I probably would consider taking Kelly if I thought I was giving a little kid a once-in-a-lifetime experience. But I'm not. She's already been twice and she's only 5. Our mothers have been 0 times. Jane's only rationale for wanting me to take her daughter seems to be that Disney is meant for kids. It's weird to go with only adults. And it'd be evil to not take a 5-year-old to Disney if you had the chance. There's also the issue of Kelly herself. She's not a completely terrible child, but she's whiny and throws tantrums regularly. I don't really want to spend a week with that. Also, what if she gets homesick? What if she gets actually sick? What if she gets lost? I'm not a parent myself and I would have no idea what to do in those situations. I also don't want to saddle my mother with the responsibility of caring for her. I babysat Kelly before, but only for a few hours at a time. I'm not sure why my cousin is even comfortable with the idea of me taking her child 3 states away. We are in North Carolina, so it's not like Orlando is just a short drive down the road if something happens. I tried telling Jane I'm not comfortable bringing Kelly, and she just said this is a good opportunity to find out what being a parent is like. What? She's almost acting like I'm not serious about not bringing Kelly, and I'm just pretending I don't want to bring her. It's really weird. Jane and I have always been very close, like we are sisters. And I'm afraid this has the potential to ruin our relationship once it comes to a head. What is the best way to tell her no without sounding like an evil child hater, or am I being selfish for not taking a kid to Disney? My sister-in-law and I have an agreement. She watches my kids 3 days a week, and I watch hers 3 days a week. This agreement has stood since March 2020 without issues. Any changes have been discussed weeks in advance. A couple weeks ago, we had an argument. The next day, I brought my kids to her house, dropped them off, and left. I didn't speak to my sister-in-law, because when one of us is in a rush, like I was, it's standard for us to just let the kids out, stay in the car, and drive off when you see the door open. I drove to work, about 40 minutes away. When I got there, I had about 20 missed calls, and even more texts, all from my sister-in-law, all saying she didn't want to watch the kids given our argument. Her first text arrived a little before I got to her place, but I didn't see it until I got to work because my phone is always on silent when I drive. I rang her, said I'll arrange to work from home, then come get the kids. She said I have 45 minutes to get back to her place or she would call the police. I told my supervisor the situation, and she said I could leave after I did a few things. This delayed me 20 minutes. When I got back to my sister-in-law's, just over an hour later, she said she'd already called the police when the 45 minutes ran out. I then had to stick around long enough to tell the officer that I didn't abandon my children, there was just a communication issue. Sister-in-law and I had another shouting match later over this. I arranged other childcare for my kids and I've been mostly ignoring her since. However, she reached out and apologized, and has asked if I'd be willing to go back to the old childcare arrangement. I work with kids. If I got child abandonment on my record, I would never work in my field again, which she knew. And her calling the police was a massive overreaction, so if she needs a babysitter she can go whistle for all I care. She said that if I checked my phone, talked to her that morning, or came back when I was supposed to, she would not have needed to call the police, and I did this to myself. As she gave me a warning with that first text and I could have checked my phone or spoken to her directly when I got to her place. All of which she says she would have done if she were in my position, given that we'd argued the night before. I've told her that if she thinks I'm babysitting for her, she's delusional, and she's on her own. Because of my refusal, it's looking like she may have to quit her job because my brother and her would pay more for a babysitter than they would earn from her working. My mother and brother have both called me an arsehole because there were no consequences to her calling the police, and that while she overreacted, she's apologized, so if I really forgive her, I'll let us move on. This income loss would also mean that she, my brother, and my niece and nephew might need to move somewhere cheaper. That my brother might have to take on extra hours at work. And in an extreme scenario they may even be completely unable to live independently, meaning they'd have to move in with her parents, who live several hours away. I have been with my partner for 7 years. We initially met online, and after meeting in person a few times, and realizing our affection for one another, we found it promising to move in together. I moved from California to Pennsylvania to be with him throughout graduate school. All was seemingly well during this time. I have never really had any reason to not trust him. I encouraged him to very much so, to try his best to make friends, or to explore hobbies on his own outside of the various ones we share, because I have my own passions. And I found we connected most when we met in the middle through conversations about these passions, through the act of explaining or showcasing what we've taken in or learned. Throughout these 7 years, he has struggled with very low self-esteem, and though I don't necessarily think of myself as the pillar of self-love, the depth of mine doesn't reach the low perception of his self-value. Because of this, he has seen and stopped seeing both a counselor and a therapist, and has been on medication to help for the last 6 months. Things were seemingly well between us, and continued to be pretty fluid. We continued to share things, and take long walks, and were pretty open-ended about where we stood in the relationship. If one was feeling a bit of an ebb, the other would pick up more of a share, and vice versa. However, things took a bit of a dip about 2 days ago when I felt the ebb and asked him about it. Initially, he said there was really nothing wrong. And perhaps I was just feeling this way because with our schedules we haven't been able to see one another, for long periods of time like we are used to, which is true. But the feeling continued to irk me, and when I asked about it a second time, he confessed to me. He had begun talking to another girl from another country via Instagram direct messages. And though things between she and him never crossed the boundaries of platonic friendship, he really loved the initial rush of someone asking him questions about his favorite movie, his favorite album, his favorite book. All things he and I already know very well about one another. I asked if he'd sent any selfies, or anything risque, and he said no, though I can't confirm, because he deleted the messages. A good deal of me believes him, because of how open he was about the initial conversations to begin with. We slept apart, and I just felt really confused the entire night, because I couldn't really resonate with wanting that sort of attention from someone else. If anything, his yearning for that type of attention sort of hurt. It felt like I wasn't doing enough, or giving enough. The next morning, though I don't have an Instagram, and am not on the app, I went to check his using the desktop version, and found that posts where he once called me the love of his life, or a specific post with a gift I gave him that once said, "Greatest gift from the greatest girl," were still on his profile, but the words, "girlfriend," or "love of my life," were completed erased. With this realization, my confusion and hurt turned to very real heartache. I called him and asked if he had deleted these words from the specific posts, and with shame, he said yes, he did. When I asked why, he said it was because he just didn't want the attention from the girl asking him about himself to be disrupted if she found out he was in a long-term relationship. I guess this is where I asked the obvious and questioned why someone who is just asking about your favorite books, movies, etc., would be driven away by the fact that you have a girlfriend. And he said he didn't know why he did it, and that it was a massive mistake. At the risk of seeming toxic, and I will take full accountability for seeming so or being so, I asked him to please deactivate his Instagram for the time being while we sort through this, his Twitter as well. He did, and though I was feeling a bit of relief about that, I couldn't help but feel a bit saddened that he didn't choose to do that on his own for the benefit of our relationship. He had to wait for me to ask. Which again, just made me feel like such a toxic and controlling partner. Two things I always strive to be so far from. When he got home from work, we discussed everything at massive length, and he continued to swear up and down that these conversations pertained strictly to music, movies, and books, and he didn't have interest in her. Just interest in the initial rush of the attention he was receiving. We read a few articles, and he broke things down to me as his self-esteem has never been lower. Despite his career as a doctor being at a high, and his finances in order, he felt things with his music weren't taking off. And with that came a feeling that he wasn't special, and it was nice for someone to make him feel that way. I felt shame and asked him if I wasn't doing enough or giving enough to him to make him feel that way. He said, I defiantly was. But my love, and attention and affection, became a pillar he could rely on, and got used to, so with new attention came a rush. And he liked that. I asked him if he wanted to be single, and find that rush in dating new people. And he kept insisting that that's so far from what he wants. He wants to remain a couple, and do all he can to work on these things together. Though I can't help but correlate that feeling he enjoys with the feeling of a first date. Which hurts, of course. I told him I didn't really see how we could move past this because there was nothing much for me to make an attempt to work on moving forward. This seems to be a self-stemming problem that I emphasize with, but just don't want to be on the receiving end of the counter effects. So though it is incredibly uneasy to begin to think of how difficult it'll be to begin again, it is just as difficult to think about how difficult it would be to stay and try to rebuild back up an issue that I feel like just a bystander. When it comes to this has all been very painful, and if this comes to an end, I just want it to be as civil and as possible. He deserves to love himself, but not at the expense of the love we have between us. I deserve love that is stable and comforting, and not laced with newfound paranoia. Despite this all, my heart is still very much in this, of course, and he has been very vocal about how it was just one mistake. Nothing happened, we can work through this, etc. And I secretly keep hoping he will make a step, any step really, to showcase these words and implement action, seek a new therapist. Find the two of us a relationship counselor, buy a book on self-help or on how couple conquer affairs, anything at all. Without me having to be the one to ask him. I just want him to have that yearning that he continues to say he has, but instead of saying it, I was him to show me. That makes me irrational or just plain dumb. I believe to be in a state where I can handle either answer. Or something completely different just the same. Do all think I'm blowing something completely out of proportion? Given how this was an exchange of conversation between him and another girl for just a few days. And his erasure of me on his profile was only for about 2 days? This has been a first in this relationship, this has been a first in my life truthfully. I just felt completely vulnerable and isolated.